90+% of end-of-life doulas you're going to come across came to this work through personal loss.
I'm not personally interested in like having the corpse on display. I know certain cultures are super into that. Some cultures are super opposed to it.
Questions I ask the client is, what is your experience with death and dying? And you would be shocked at the number of people who are 80 years old and have very little experience with what a dying person looks like.
MDMA, it's a psychedelic, but it's not a hallucinogen, but it's an empathogen. And it just like cracks your heart open and allows you to let go and forgive like anything and everything that anyone ever did to you.
Welcome to episode 59 of Super States, Practices of Transformation with me, your host, Joshua Peters. Super States explores the overlap of using trance states along with personal or professional development. In each episode, we talk to world-class experts, industry leaders, and revolutionary thinkers who share with us the latest information and tools along with their own personal stories to inspire you on your journey. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcast host or on YouTube. That way you'll stay up to date with new episodes. And if you find this show valuable, please give me a 5-star review. That's the best way to help the show grow. Today, I have two guests, Kat Campion and Jane Whitlock. Kat and Jane are dedicated end-of-life doulas who provide compassionate support to individuals in their final stages of life. Through this unique approach, they help ease the transition by addressing emotional, spiritual, and physical needs, sometimes even incorporating innovative methods like psychedelics for holistic care. This was a very deep conversation, and I'm really excited to bring it to you. Embracing the End of Life with Kat Campion and Jane Whitlock. Welcome to Super States. I am here today with Kat and Jane. Kat Campion and Jane Whitlock. So Kat and Jane, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Why don't you guys, if you would tell us by starting what it is that you do and what kind of impact that makes on people's lives. That'd be a great way to start here.
Okay. I'm an end-of-life doula in a skilled nursing facility. So that is the folks that need the most care round-the-clock nursing. I'm pretty unusual. Most end-of-life doulas are private pay and work in people's homes, and people hire them to do this kind of work. And so I'm basically work with all the folks on hospice, and I meet them where they are. So some people, I don't describe myself as an end-of-life doula. I start with maybe I'm a serious illness doula, and sometimes people facing serious illness have stuff that they're carrying around and don't really have anyone to talk to about that. So that's who I am. And that evolves differently for every single person I meet. And really, my hope for them is that by the time they get to active dying, they have sorted through the stuff that might hold them back here. So they are really free to surrender on this journey that none of us really know what happens. That's what I feel like my job is. Meeting them where they are and hoping to untie some stuff that's holding them here.
And I am still figuring out who I am in this world, kind of with this lady's help. So one of the things I identify right now as a end-of-life coach or death midwife, because my training, we used the term midwife instead of doula, but there's really no differentiation as far as in the end-of-life world. I now am weaving psychedelics into it, and that's how you and I met, Joshua, is that I'm identifying as a psychedelic-informed end-of-life coach or death midwife, and learning from Jane, where I volunteer at the hospice in my neighborhood. I lead gentle yoga and meditation every week, and I bring my really advanced, evolved dog, who's not here right now because she's a little bit injured. Dobby, I bring her in and sort of brighten their day. I've been studying, sitting with, learning about the end of life work for about a decade. And my first client was I want to show a picture. My best friend, Mimi Moss, died of breast cancer about 5 years ago. She's an angel. You can kind of see her beautiful woman and her baby. Her daughter's now 15, so I have a relationship with her. So that was some of the best training I got, was being with Mimi for the final 3 years, months, and minutes of her life. And now I'm sort of just figuring out what to do with the second half of my life. I've been an actress for 35 years, and it's losing interest for me, and I'm way more passionate about end of life stuff. So I'm not doing it professionally yet, but I'm professing myself to it.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. I'd like to learn how the both of you got to this point, and you kind of hinted at it, Kat. Uh, if you would take turns to share your background, like your origin story, how you got to this point.
I would say that 90+% of end of life doulas you're going to come across came to this work through personal loss. I always say there's kind of a before this journey with someone and an after, and you're changed utterly by it. And for me, I was a middle school teacher, coach, athletic director, and my husband got sick with kidney cancer and he died 4 months later. And I felt wildly unprepared for this.
Wow.
And I also felt like I had been living this life entitled to a certain amount of time. And all that was just shattered. And so I just thought, I'm going to follow my intuition and figure out what I'm supposed to do here. And it's totally led to death, dying, grief, loss. And then I found out about end of life doulas and thought, I want to be in that space where I was, with no one to turn to. And sometimes all people need is a peaceful presence, someone who's been there before and who can say, you know what, there's many right ways. You're doing it right. Or you might want to consider doing X, Y, or Z.
Mm.
So that's kind of how I got here.
And I, interestingly enough, like I said, I was actually studying and training. I guess I might be in the like 10% that didn't get interested in it because of the loss. But after 3 years of sort of part-time reading and studying, I did 3 rounds of Sacred Crossings, is end of life or death midwife training program in Southern California. So I did 3 different, courses through that. I did my hospice training through Twilight Brigade. Unfortunately, no longer exists. It's a volunteer hospice training for Veterans Affairs. I have my own personal bias and hangups about the military. I'm a leftist. I'm a peacenik. So, but I want to love all the people in the military, even though love the sin or hate the sin sort of thing. I feel so much compassion for people in the military because many of them are not in it necessarily by choice. It was sort of the only life option they had. They recruit a lot of young people and a lot of people of color. So there are a lot of people dying alone at the end of life as veterans. And they offered us this great training program in exchange for just, when you're done, please find some time to sit with veterans at the end of life. And that wove itself into a very strong part of my mission. Is there are people won't die completely alone. I totally get it. I suspect I might be one of those people that's just like, all right, I was a very social person and that I'm dying. I just want to go inward. And Mimi definitely was doing that as she was dying. But there are people that don't have the choice of whether they want to be alone or not at end of life. So I want to offer that to people. Like, if you want someone to be there, that's a lot of what we do. Is some people just want someone to be there. Some people want people to hold their hand or just lovingly caress them or read Bible verses or pray. I'll do whatever will make people feel better at the end of life. And then the other training I did was I was living in Los Angeles, and LA County was offering free caregiver training, so that more people could do their own caregiving instead of all these seniors contracting out others. It was really for families to be trained to how to care for your own or to become a professional caregiver. So I did all 3 of those trainings over 3 years, 3 of my final years in LA. And as soon as my training was done, as much as it would for that level, was when Mimi got her diagnosis. And then 3 years later, she died. So yeah, that was undergrad was all the training I did, and grad school was being there with Mimi through her end times.
Got it. And just for people that are listening who are like, what even is a death doula? Describe to us what somebody like you does and kind of what that might look like.
I always say if I had an elevator pitch, it would have to be on one of those 6,000 story buildings in Dubai. I still struggle with answering this. So doula is a Greek word. It means servant. So we are really companioning people. We are not, you know, leading them. 85% of our work is listening and offering options. Um, I kind of lost my train of thought. We're non-medical. So that's a really important piece. We have to partner with hospice.
That's a good argument for why most people use doula instead of midwife, because in the birth world, I'm sure you know, there's a doula and a midwife. A midwife is it's like practically a doctor. It's like this high level of training for the birthing, very scientific, and the doula is more kind of what we're doing. So I get the argument that I sometimes consider maybe I should just relent and use doula, but my mouth doesn't like the way it feels in my mouth. That's an autism thing. So back to Jane explaining her version of what a death doula is, and I'll add some more.
Yeah. So, we provide support, and that's oftentimes emotional or spiritual. And in the nursing home, it's often physical because there are just logistical things that happen in a facility where you can no longer push the call light. So really, people who are dying cannot get help on their own. So it's really helpful to have someone in the room who's like, hey, they need to be changed, or they're in pain, that kind of stuff. I really think it's the experience that we have that is our most helpful. That's what people are really looking for. That's one of the first questions I ask a client is, what is your experience with death and dying? And you would be shocked at the number of people who are 80 years old and have very little experience with what a dying person looks like. How do you support a dying person? How do you say goodbye? How do you sit vigil? Like I was with my husband. I had no idea what I was doing. I was in Our Lady of Peace, which is a hospice house, fully supported, but there was nobody like a doula who could be with me as long as I needed to be there. Chaplains come in and out, social workers come in and out. None of them gave me a game plan in my head for how this was going to happen. Like, this is how his body shuts down. These are things you can do to support him. None of that. I mean, I got a pamphlet by Barbara Carnes, which is ubiquitous in end of life, which is gone from my site. And every hospice will hand it out. But, you can read that pamphlet 8,000 times, but it doesn't quiet the anxiety in your head of So that, I think, is primary job of a doula.
So that I would say that's sort of the core of doulaing. And then there's all these other satellite possibilities. Like when I did my training at Sacred Crossings, I feel like it was the majority of the training was about getting your paperwork in order and making sure your healthcare directive and your death care directive, like what do you want after, home funerals, green burial. I determined that I'm not personally interested in having the corpse on display. I know certain cultures are super into that, some cultures are super opposed to it. Pretty much every single person I've asked in my family and friend network, and I run in a pretty a-religious, atheist, agnostic sort of world, and they're all just like, ew, I don't like the last thing I remember about the person to be their corpse. So I'm not interested in serving that way, but I think it's beautiful that some people do and some people want that. They say it brings closure. I don't, it's not me. I'm way more into green cemeteries as part of the end of life world. And I think my primary purpose is I'm a party thrower, and I want to throw death parties, funeral parties for the living and the dying. So not waiting until you're dead to have your party, but we're all dying. In case anyone did not get the memo yet, you're all dying. You're all in the process of dying. And after the age of 11, you're already starting to senesce, and you're literally starting to die off after the age of 11. So we're all dying. And I love these ideas. Like, what happens at a funeral? Like, the best funerals are ones where people gush and share stories and oh my gosh, you never heard this one, or, oh, she did this, or just telling everyone how much you adored the person. Like, would you rather hear that before you die? So I think in the long run, I see myself mostly serving that I could help people throw their own funeral parties, but they don't need to be in the end stages. They could be, I've talked to my parents and we might do it with them. They're in their 80s. They're all relatively healthy. My dad's got his partner, my mom's got hers. And I'm like, let's throw a funeral party at 84 while they're still healthy and well. And it'll be like a wake. All four of my grandparents are Irish. I'm a very Irish identifying person. person. I'm Irish citizen. And so I love the idea of the wake. My culture goes big with alcohol and food and music and dance and a celebration of life. Here we use the term celebration of life, but it rarely feels like one. It often feels somber. And especially if it wasn't like a young person who died, I feel like it's mostly a good thing, to celebrate their life. So that's what I get. That's what I'm jazzed about.
Yeah, that was great that you brought up so many of those other things. Legacy is also another word that gets used, and I think does this person feel like they need to leave something behind? Is that going to give them peace? Another question I often ask is, are you afraid of the dying process? Or are you afraid of actually just not being here, missing out on stuff? And those answers can sort of guide you to the work that you have to do with them. I'm a big fan of legacy letters. It's not super complicated, but you can leave these things for people that hopefully will give you peace of mind that you have said everything you needed to say, and they have this on a concrete letter. At the nursing home, I'm still working toward this, but I offer residents to write a legacy letter to say goodbye and thank you to staff and friends in the nursing home, because death's such a huge part of what happens there. Like, how do we do that in a way that feels like we're honoring people and that we have this community that is also about celebrating people's not just loss, not just disappearing.
We have one of our, I believe he's still in dying, or did he die? JH, one of our clients at the hospice, is in the active stages of dying. And this is the first time for me, well, through this program, it's the first time that I really got close to someone. She's over and over again, but this is someone I've been leading. He's been very passionate about joining my meditation every Wednesday. And then it was like, you're on the text thread and you get a message like, oh, JH is in the active stages of dying. Here's what he's requested. He's very religious. He wants people to hold his hand and read prayers and read from the Bible, or just sit silently with them and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's just been such an honor, to be able to be there through his end stages after getting to know him really as a person.
He is still here. I just said goodbye to him because it's the weekend. So I was like, I don't know if you're going to be here on Monday, but in case you aren't, I just want to tell you how important you are. And like, he always ends every communication with everyone with God bless. Yeah. And I was like, that is like sending a little orb of light after people, and that is something that I will take from you. Like, I will carry that on for you. And I think as doulas, we really, for nurturing our own grief, because this work is hard to do, like, it's really important to have those conversations with people where you say goodbye.
Yeah. And another thing about him, like, he comes to all my meditations and then afterwards we do a gratitude circle. I have been blown away. This is a low income, most of these people are on like Medicaid or Medicare.
I always get them mixed up. Yeah. Medicare.
So most of these people are like, subsidized low income people. Two things come to me. One is that, I'm trying to finish everything. Like, I would love to finish this with a gratitude circle. I teach voiceover, and now my classes all end with a gratitude circle because there's so many health benefits of it. And I love hearing what other people are grateful for. It's a reminder of what I'm grateful for. So every person in the circle, a lot of them are not really able to speak or communicate with words. So sometimes we just throw out some possibilities and they're like, oh yeah, that. But he was always just great. Almost everyone sort of said they're grateful to be alive. They're just like in the final days, weeks, months, and grateful to be alive and grateful for friends and family, and a lot of grateful for Providence Place. Like, that I didn't expect. I think, people you go to a nursing home, you go to an end of life place, and it's just awful. I mean, this place, I'll tell the story of how I ended up volunteering there. So I try to get around as much as possible on foot and on bicycle. And so I wanted to volunteer at a hospice. So I looked on Google Maps and I found the closest one to me. And this one had, I can't remember if it was 2.1 or 2.8.
No, I think it's 1.
Oh, it had like a 2. It's definitely not a 1, but on Google Maps, the reviews were like a 2.1. And I was like, oh, no, I'm terrified. And then I thought, this place needs me. This place needs me the most. Well, whenever I focus on being of service and not getting anything in return, I get so much in return, because this lady's running like a free doula training program there as part of your volunteering. So I don't know how useful it would have been for me to just flail around at a hospice that doesn't have a doula. Like, hey, I want to volunteer. What do people need? Like, I'm learning now I'm in like my PhD program with her at the hospice. And it's like walking distance from my house, and they're Dobby friendly. They're like, oh yeah, bring your dog in. And so the dog comes, and there's all these people that everybody had pets in their life, and these people will never have access to a pet again. Oh, and she just brightens their days. So yeah, so I'm really glad that the nearest hospice in my neighborhood has low reviews, and I can't quite figure it's the families. It's not the dying, obviously, that are reviewing it poorly. The families review it poorly, and everyone in there has nothing but gratitude for the staff, all the fun activities. It's clean, like it. I wouldn't mind dying there.
No, and her class is totally magical. It is just so great to see these folks who have been so disconnected. You know, they had a stroke at 50 and they cannot move anything but maybe this much. To see them in like a yoga class and like trying to straighten up and trying to do this. And when Dobby came, one of these guys who's kind of like a toughie, you know, he's a toughie.
Tough old guy.
He's a tough old guy. And he bent down and he said, oh, you're an outside creature. We don't get outside creatures in here very often. And it was like,
and that woman who, so today's Friday. So 2 days ago when I led, there was that woman who came and said, I don't have time for your class today. I don't know how busy her schedule is in the hospice, but she said, I don't have time, but I just wanted to thank you that I'm just because of like 3 classes she's come to. She's learning how to meditate. And at the end of each, she's like, oh, I can't stop thinking. I'm like, that's everyone. I've been meditating for 30 years and that's still me, you know? And I said, but we practice. So after 3 sessions, she's like, I'm sleeping better. My depression, anxiety are reduced. And I'm like, it works. It really works, you know? So that was so magical to hear, to get that feedback.
And she had a gratitude. She was like, I'm grateful for this unconventional community at Providence Place. She said, COVID had us down bad. We are coming back.
And what she said, what a lot of people have said, is that they're so grateful for all the weirdos that they never would have met in their regular life. You know, we tend to keep to our own. I never thought about the fact that nursing homes and hospice are a place where all walks of life, all colors, all ethnicities, all genders, all languages, they all merge. And instead of being like, meh, you're meh, at the end of life, people just often soften and go, these are my best friends. So many people have said the best friends of their life they made in their final months or years at Providence Place.
Wow.
Amazing.
We gotta like get this on a PSA.
I do it professionally. I do spread the good news of things professionally. So yeah, let's do it.
I have a question around what you mean by when someone is actively dying.
So when I usually look at it when they stop eating and they start to have trouble swallowing, you kind of move to ice chips. Then you know that they've started their journey, and that, you know, usually it's a week or less. And they are really unable to do anything for themselves. So they really need like people to be checking on them every hour or doing repositioning. People get stuck in a spot, they get bed sores very quickly when their body is breaking down like that. So we sort of ramp up our services as doulas to try to be with people. You know, lots of our folks have dealt with homelessness or mental health or drug addiction. And so they fractured from their families. And we want to be there for them if they want it. And it's also part of our program is training staff, because nursing and aid school does not train you how to help people who are dying. It's the craziest thing. I just went through aid training 3 years ago, and there was zero on end of life. They were like, I was basically doing a training with them as it was going. And so you have these nurses and aides who are exposed to people dying all the time. They might have their own death anxiety that they have never dealt with. And now they're in a job where it gets like basically activated on the regular. You know, they have to wash people's bodies after they die before the funeral home comes. That can be super traumatic if no one has ever like connected you to that experience. So recently a woman died, and I came out of her room and there was an aide standing there and her eyes were just filling with tears. And she said, is she gone? And I said, yes. And she said, this is my first death. I just graduated 1 month ago. Like, and I said, "Do you want to say goodbye?" And she just nodded. So we went in and we sat on either side of her, and I, was kind of modeling for her how you say goodbye. Like, I held her hand and I thanked her for being in my life and hoping that the rest of her journey is good. And then I said, "Do you want some time alone?" And she said, "Yes." And then she spent 10 minutes in there with her. And I think, people get burnt out in large part because they have compassion fatigue, because they have no one teaching them how to nurture their grief. And the same goes for families that you're dealing with as a doula. You're helping connect them to this experience that we, in the last 100 years, have become disconnected from. In the past,
yeah, it's not a profession.
it's not
People are like, oh, there's this new thing. It's like, no, it's thousands, tens of thousands of years old.
Yeah, the living room has that name because it is not the parlor where you would lay out the bodies. So there used to be like a designated place in every home where you would lay out the body. And
in the cultures that do that, though. That's not
but
all
who
cultures, yeah.
didn't? I mean,
I don't know. Some cultures are really big into like get the body into the ground and don't lay it out and display, I think.
Oh, well, yeah, if you're Jewish, you do, but you sit.
Sit Shiva.
Yeah, you sit Shiva until you get the body in the ground, which is like under 24 hours or before the next sunset.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. But they were with the journey. They saw people actively dying. They knew there was this moment to expect, because in the nursing home, people often want to feed people when they're actively dying.
Yeah.
Or they want to give them water because they don't make the connection that actually at this point it's bringing more harm than good.
Well, and I'm all up about life tips and death tips. So if people want to speed up the dying process, like stopping taking water is really the easiest, least painful way to do that. If someone's already, near the end of life and wants to wrap it up, like stopping taking in water is not the worst way to go.
So I have had, I'm grateful that I've had 2 opportunities to be with a loved one as they pass. Well, one as they actually pass, but I've had a chance to say goodbye to another. One was my father-in-law many years ago, and it was a really powerful, meaningful experience. And the other one was my grandmother, and I was able to sit with her. I had an opportunity to be alone with her and just kind of, like you said, say goodbye. I let her know it's okay. Like, we all love her. And like, I think that stuff is really important, and it gives an opportunity both for them and for us to feel complete.
Yeah, and on that note, I noticed you used the term past. I don't know about Jane. I try to always use the word dead, died, dying, because that's what we're doing. We have these euphemisms to avoid looking directly at death. So you're in my vocabulary, I would say like your dad died, your grandpa died, your grandma died, and the past is more like, or I lost them. Like, where'd you lose? I lost my daughter. Like, whatever people want to use. I just think as part of the death positivity movement and weaving death back into the fabric of our daily life, I prefer to use the word death.
Sure. No, I really I appreciate that. I have another question for you, and this is because I've had, like, as a hypnotist, people think I can do amazing things like that are really not possible. But I've had a couple times where people have come to me to help their loved one eat again. And it was very clear to me in both cases. One of them, I could actually speak with her, and she told me, "Yes, I don't want to live anymore. I'm ready to go." But her husband wasn't. And the other one was an elderly woman who was clearly tired, and her daughter was like, "We got to keep doing. We got to keep feeding her." They're literally force feeding her, and I had a talk with her husband, with her daughter's husband, and I told him I think she's trying to just be done here. Uh, do you have to deal with people in that kind of a situation? Like, is that something that you run across?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the time.
How do you approach that?
You really try to have a relationship and gain trust before you even come anywhere near those kind of conversations. But there's one family in particular that comes to mind. It wasn't necessarily eating and drinking, but it was like I mean, you can be very clear, like the body is shutting down. So what happens when you put food in it? It doesn't have any energy to process it. So people vomit, people have diarrhea, they get nauseous. You're creating this whole other host of problems. So it's like it's a big education piece. And drinking can cause choking. If you're with one person one time when they choke, you realize I don't ever want to go. I don't ever want to do that to them again, because dying people have so little energy, and to see them being like, it's terrible. And lots of times you can't see those moments coming. They could drink yesterday, and then you give them a drink and they take this huge straw, and then they're like, So it's just educating family that really our job now here is to support the body in doing what it knows how to do, what it's ready to. And if we push it in the other direction, we are creating more pain. But there's cultures where they, like, especially there's some African cultures that you don't ever stop pushing food. And it can be really difficult for nursing to see that, because but I think ultimately it is it is that wife and her husband and their culture. And who are we you can educate one time and then you're done. And you support them in any way that you can. We had a big conflict at the nursing home, and the hospice nurse was just so upset, and I thought, she is not, this dying person is not your family member, so you don't get to get so upset about this. All right, your job is I asked the wife, I said, do you feel supported? And she said, yeah, I feel supported by you. I do not feel supported by any of the nurses. And I thought, so she has to go through this experience following her cultural rules and then feel disrespected by everybody. So yeah, it's just super complicated. Oh, that one family I was thinking about was they loved up. Their mother was in memory care, and the daughter and the granddaughters came 3-4 times a week, and they played the oldies and they talked to her, and they just loved her up so much. But when she went into active dying, there was one grandson who was like in med school, and they became totally obsessed with like counting the pulse and the respirations and getting the pulse oximeter to watch the O2 go down. And I was gentle and ginger about like, yes, we know that's happening. And, there are these other ways that you can comfort her and support her, but it was like falling on deaf ears. So after about 6 hours, I was like, listen, I have seen how you guys love her. I have seen how excellent you are at creating this orb of love around here. For the love of God, now is the time. Okay. And then it was like, oh, you're right, you're right, you're right. So they put away all the things and gathered around her and were singing for her. But that's the kind of like, I don't think it's rocket science what we do. It is just sometimes stating the obvious for people who are so anxious that they can't actually see what's right in front of them.
So natural, but it's been sort of cultured out of us to handle death in a natural, appropriate way because of fear.
Kat, you mentioned that you're psychedelic informed death midwife. Describe to us what that entails.
Yeah, I can tie this back to what we were just talking about. So my personal experience with wanting to relieve someone's suffering at the end of life, but having pushback when Mimi was in active stages of dying, and we all knew it. And, her mother was a nurse from Haiti, and her mother was really good at keeping us, informed at the end. Several friends rushed to be by her side in case it was the very end. And she had oxygen to survive on, but she kept wanting to take it off. And I was like, kind of pulled the friends aside. I said, if we let her take the oxygen off, we're all going to have a really traumatic witnessing, and then her suffering will be over. And they were, oh, you're an awful, they were so offended and appalled that I'd even suggested. And I'm just like, I just have compassion for my best friend dying, and I want her suffering to be over. I don't know if it was in her plan or the mother's plan, but she wanted to die at home. So there was all that commotion of, let's get her dying body home for the final 24 hours. And she did get to die at home. And we did the best we could to provide a beautiful end of life for her, but she was terrified. I could tell in her eyes, she was gasping and terrified those final couple of days. And
with O2 or without O2?
With the oxygen, yeah. She was just terrified. And so I had the thought, I did not know anything about psychedelics being used therapeutically or for end of life at and again, this was like 6 years ago. And I had the thought, which I kind of kept to myself, was like, wow, MDMA is this like heart, it's an empathogen. It's a psychedelic, but it's not a hallucinogen, but it's an empathogen. And it just like cracks your heart open and allows you to let go and forgive like anything and everything that anyone ever did to you. And once you've forgiven and healed, when the medicine wears off, the work is kind of done. And they have a lot of research that says that 1 or 2 sessions can cure PTSD and all sorts of trauma, anxiety, depression, especially like with veterans, I've done a lot on. So I mentioned it to the father of her child, and he said, I had the exact same thought. And we didn't, I'm probably going to share this with Mimi's mom. So yeah, I don't think we've ever told her this, but we figured Mimi's mom probably wouldn't have agreed to that. And we didn't really have any drugs on us anyway. But interesting that he and I both had not only the same thought for relief, but the same substance. So then I started looking into like, is this something you can give people at end of life? And then I discovered people have been researching and working therapeutically with this stuff since these chemicals were invented in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you know. So that was when I decided I wanted to incorporate it into the umbrella of my death midwifery that I'm now saying psychedelic informed. I've been tripping since the 80s. Interesting story about I went to the psychedelic science conference in Denver last year, and I did the pre-conference psychedelic camping adventure in the Rockies, which was amazing. But I went to it with this like beginner's mind. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so new to the psychedelic therapy world. I'm so new to like psychedelics as a profession. And so I went to it thinking like I'm gonna be sitting at the feet of masters. Well, I was older than a lot of the people and I had way more psychedelic experience. And I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of an old guard at this. And I just assumed everyone was going to know more than me. But just having those psychedelic experiences for almost 40 years, you know, has informed, I can see why it can be used that way. And so now I'm just researching and learning and deciding like what next. I'm the bardo right now. I'm really in the in between, figuring out and just listening and sitting silently and going, show me what next. And I had a couple of huge experiences over the past few days that have informed it more, including I saw Tuesday, the new Julia Louis-Dreyfus movie, just called Tuesday. And it's about a woman who's not handled very well her teenage or young adult daughter in the process of dying of cancer. And what came out of that is, I think I've shared with you, Joshua, I'm in development on an animated series for PBS called Life Ups that are little 2-minute life hacks, life tips to help your physical, mental, financial, any aspect of your life. I'm animating them to help people's lives be easier and better with like whatever little bite you can chew off for now. Seeing that movie, I realized I not only want to make life ups, I want to make death ups. So I want to make a companion animated series that is all the tips I have learned and am currently learning to help people incorporate death into their life and have a better life, a better death.
Yay!
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. What would you say? So you've probably seen a lot of families kind of go through these kinds of transitions and face death like you've talked about. What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect that they come across, and how can we help people get a better understanding of what this experience is really all about?
I would
That's
say pain meds is pretty misunderstood. You know, people are
Mm.
very afraid of morphine, and there's a lot of stories out there that, you know, hospice killed my loved one with morphine.
Mm.
And I really believe that's a misunderstanding. When you're giving more morphine, like that means the disease is just progressing. The pain is higher, the shortness of breath is higher. So, you know, who wants to die short of breath or who wants to die in pain? So I just try to tell families morphine is like your best friend. And you don't want to be lots of, you know, I think there are some nurses who are afraid of like appearing to be like shortening someone's life. And so they hold back on morphine. It's like, no, I mean,
Mm.
really, when someone gets to that point, it's very easy for suffering to go up when you hold back the drugs. So I'm coaching family on the liberal use of pain meds, and that they're not doing the person's any favor. I asked once on a Facebook group I'm in with hospice nurses, how do you want to die that is different than the way your patients die? Kind of like doctors have better deaths because they've seen it. I'm like, hospice nurses, what's different? And they all agreed, like, no oxygen. I mean, so many people on hospice are on oxygen, and they say for most people it's like putting gas in a broken car. So it's purely comfort. If you put it on the person and the person is like, yeah, this is comfortable, I like this, use it. But lots of times people are ripping it off, and we don't let them rip it off. We put it back on, and they're very loud. They create a ton of heat. If they're condensers or whatever. So I just say it's just for comfort. If they like it, fine. If not, fine. It's not going to shorten their
a lot
life.
of what we do is for our comfort. Like it really recently occurred to me that how much of like pharma we give to ill-behaved children and young adults and stuff, it's not for their comfort, it's for ours. Teachers can't function if their students are up and about. It's like, okay, it's a band-aid, but a lot of the stuff that we do, like force the oxygen on or force the food and water on, that's not for their comfort. It's to make us feel better, and that's not really fair to take that away from someone.
Yeah. I think a good rule of thumb is like they're in the driver's seat. The person dying is in the driver's seat, and you give them as much control as
and don't be a backseat driver.
Don't be a backseat driver. I had a young woman dying, and her mom was basically chasing her around with Ativan, which is anti-anxiety. And the woman was like, she kind of wanted that's another question I ask people, like, what's your relationship between consciousness and pain? Would you rather have pain fully managed if it makes you more sleepy, or would you rather handle some pain? Do you want to be alert for this experience? And the woman wanted to be more alert. And she's like, they were feuding so much. I said to the mom, you manage your own anxiety. Take the Ativan yourself.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. She needs the Ativan. MYOB. I want to put Jane on the spot and ask her a moment of death question, if you don't mind, because in my Sacred Crossings training, I really felt like I was the only person the entire, I went through 3 waves, and so I met different people each time. It was 100% women, middle-aged and senior, except one guy who died of a heart attack right after he finished his training. He had just married the love of his life, and very quickly died. But I felt like I was the only person who really identified as like devoid of beliefs or religion or secular. I'm purely secular, and I feel like that's a thing I bring to the table is we're always going to impose, whether we want to or not, like impose our beliefs. And I like that there's a lot of people who are like, could you please be someone for me who doesn't pray over me and doesn't push the Bible or whatever your religion is, that I really, because it can be really upsetting, like, oh, don't worry, you're going to a better place. Like, how dare you? A lot of people don't believe that. So I was a little unpopular sometimes in my end of life training because I'd be like, don't forget, there are a lot of people that it was mostly like what I would call new age women. So they're like, oh, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. It's like, well, it's a different kind of religion, but still is a belief system. And it's better if you don't impose it. So there was a lot of talk about how when the corpse is done being alive, because people say, oh, your journey to the next thing or to the next, and that's that assumption that there is something after. And I don't deny it, but I also don't subscribe to it. I just go, maybe. I say maybe about everything. I plead ignorant about everything. But most of them, and including the teacher, definitely seemed to have this. I had this experience of when the corpse is no longer existing, you would see like a cloud coming out, or you would experience, I'm really intrigued about near-death experiences, or like my mother has experiences where she's like, oh, my aunt Bridget in Ireland came to see me, and then I called the family and they're like, we haven't seen her for a few days. I guess her ghost came and visited you, and then it turned out she wasn't dead, but like my grandpa came to escort her and all this. So I would just like to know if Jane has had actual experiences, since you've witnessed so many people dying. Have you had any like metaphysical or inexplicable experiences?
I would say I do not see. People say they see the soul leaving the body. I do not see that.
Never seen that.
I do believe it goes up.
Okay.
I see a lot of people scanning the end, like above the end of the bed, but they're clearly watching something. Sometimes they can articulate it. Sometimes they can't. People say pretty amazing things. Not everybody. Sometimes people will say, so can you see, like this one guy was, he was like, can you see the kid on the trike? And I was like, no, I can't. And then he's like, and that was sort of alarming to him. And I said, do you feel like you're walking between the worlds? Like, I think you can see stuff I can't.
Yeah.
And
Ooh,
some people will say, yeah, I'm walking between the worlds is what is happening. And some people will be like, nope, that's not happening. And I think you can explain stuff away with, meds. Maybe it's a hallucination, but like it happens. I would say maybe 30-ish% of people I read, if people don't have rock solid belief in what happens next, I tend to read this book, The Incredible Afterlife of Billy Fingers, and because it resonates with Rob's atheist, didn't believe anything happened. And I definitely, like 6 months after he died, I felt his presence, like, whew, and it was way different from his earthly presence. He was an anxious worrier, sick, and this was it was like love and unconditional acceptance. And I'm like, whoa, I was driving and I could feel it. So I was like, that seems real. And I've had dreams about him where he comes to me and I feel like whatever juju is on the other side gets on me and I can feel it. And it's like peace. It's so as I read this book with residents, this has happened 15 times where the experience of the characters in the book is very much my experience with Rob, and they will be like, oh, that is exactly how it is. And I say, tell me more about that. And they say, my husband died last year. I have dreams about him. And when I dream about him, I feel love, this unbelievable love that I've never felt in my whole life. Or I can feel my wife, she'll like curl up behind me and I can feel love just coming through her into me. And just been dead for 3 months.
And it's always love. Like the memo, when people have near-death experiences and stuff, I'm just like, that's probably the thing. And I want to take it back. I haven't identified as an atheist for quite some time. I'm an autotheist. So I believe we are all literally just little tendrils of God. There is no separate thing that is God, that it's just the everything, the universe and the source and consciousness. So in that sense, I feel like people have assumptions. We say atheist, just like when you say religion or Christian or God, there's all these attachments. So now I really identify as an autotheist. And ever since Mimi died, I've never felt a touch of her light. Nothing has ever in the 6 years has ever been like, I felt Mimi. And like, I think about her all the time. I write about her all the time. I definitely incorporate her. I inherited a lot of her wardrobe because we were kind of the same size. So I go out, and her mother lost her only child and her father lost his one daughter. And so I get dressed up in Mimi's clothes and I go dancing and I take pictures and I send it to the parents and go like, I took Mimi out here and look how great, look what a good time Mimi had there. But I forgot I do have an experience where one of my best friends from childhood, her brother at like 19 and he was a friend of mine as well. Kind of like we did psychedelics together in the 80s, and he had a horrible car accident and was rushed to the emergency room. And I didn't know how awful. I didn't know that he was going to die. I was just like, oh, he's going to be crippled for life or whatever. And I was driving the day that he was in the hospital, and I just whoosh came to me while I was driving. I was like, Dan just died. I was like, whoa. No doubt in my mind, Dan just died. And then I got home and the phone was like landlines. I got the phone call and they're like, just so you know, Dan died, within the past hour. And I was like, I know. Wow. So that's the only experience I ever had like that was true, like inexplicable. But some kind of soul connection, I guess, for lack of a better descriptor.
Wow.
Yeah, in China they don't say dead, they say leaving the planet, and left the planet, which speaks to me that like dead is too final. Like I just think they transitioned into whatever we become next.
Yeah, psychedelics does the same thing. You definitely leave the planet, leave the body. It is like a little type of death.
What if somebody wants to connect with either one of you? What's the best way for them to do that?
So in Minnesota, there's a Minnesota Death Collaborative, and it's a website with all kinds of end-of-life professionals. And if you're not in Minnesota, there's the National End of Life Doula Alliance, NEDA, and they have a state by state directory, which is really helpful in finding doulas. And I'm Death Doula Jane on the web.
Yeah, and if people wanted to reach out to me individually, they can just go to my website, CatherineCampion.com, which is not an end-of-life website at all yet. It might transform to that over the years, but it's just my acting portfolio. I think I want to say one more thing that I didn't really go so deeply into, the like why incorporate psychedelics into end of life, but not just for relieving suffering with like a non-hallucinogenic psychedelic like MDMA, but the ego death that comes with a really profound LSD, psilocybin, these like truly psychedelic experiences where you have, DMT, like the most powerful on the planet, that definitely confirmed my suspicions that I am God and that this is just microscopic and the universe. Yeah, it can't use words to describe the DMT journey, but it definitely was a complete ego death. That's a type of death.
Yeah. And I think one thing, because medical aid in dying is currently before the Minnesota legislature, and it's kind of it's growing. As a death doula, it does make me a little, I mean, I think, yes, everybody should have the right, but also in a death phobic society, giving people the option to just skip over the whole dying process makes me sad, because I think dying is our last developmental task. It is the death of the ego. You are diminished utterly, and it is your opportunity to be vulnerable and to say, I'm sorry, and to have these conversations that you have held at bay your entire life. And it's such an opportunity. And I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, but it is an opportunity for healing if people have the ability to like open their heart like that. And I think for a lot of people, your physical self dies and your ego dies, and whatever spirit rises and you become your best self, you can, if you're open to it.
Yeah.
So
and I have a slightly different take that, like, I think we both agree that we want it to be legal, just like other things where power is taken away from our bodies, where we don't get to determine that it's legal. But I think there are certain instances like ALS, having witnessed someone being destroyed by ALS, and imagine being sort of forced to stay alive. You could still have the death experience of like, okay, I've been dying for 3 years and it's awful, and now I'm ready to wrap it up because I don't want to do another 3 years of suffering. Reducing suffering is like my number one plan or goal right now. And so I can see the way that there are exceptions to the rule of like, all right, I want you to be able to get out if for some reason, whatever cruel joke, if there is a God like making choices, why would you force someone to suffer for years? So yeah, it's a spectrum.
To wrap up here, tell me one thing that you're grateful for today.
I'm super grateful for the program, for finding Providence Place on Google Maps. I'm grateful for the low reviews that confirmed that I needed to go give whatever I could. Super grateful for this lady giving me the opportunity. And I'm grateful for all the gratitude coming back to me. My girlfriend, Mushroom Miriam, the mycologist, just called me minutes before she got here to do this. And she said, I have a couple of close people who are in the active stages of dying of cancer. And I just want to tell you how grateful I am for your friendship and the work that you do in the world. I'm so proud of you. I'm so blown away and impressed by what you're doing. And I was just like, your timing couldn't be better, because now I'm going into this interview with all this confidence of like, I am doing really important work and I am really good at it. So I'm grateful for the gratitude coming back at me to, I always say my favorite compliment anyone can ever give me is that I inspire them. Inspirational. And in case you don't know, inspire. So when we die, we expire. The last thing we do is an exhale. And then the inspire, is they're inviting me into them. If I inspire someone, they're inhaling me. And then when you die, you exhale. So
Ooh,
I'm a word nerd.
I'm grateful to do this podcast with you, and that people have an interest in sharing this news and spreading the word. And I feel like the culture is changing like a cruise ship, very slowly.
And I'm grateful that we had this opportunity, because it's been really fantastic to get the your perspective as somebody who is really in it and has witnessed death in a way that most people never do. So I'm grateful that you were able to share that and you were on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Joshua.
Thank you.
Hey there. If you feel like something holds you back from reaching your true potential, listen up. I've got something incredible to share with you. I'm offering a free 7-day email program that helps you break through those blocks to get to the unshakable confidence and success that you deserve. Imagine starting each day with a clear mind, a strong sense of purpose, and the confidence to go after whatever it is that you truly want. This program guides you through a powerful process to uncover and then eliminate the root causes of your limitations. You receive daily emails with practical steps, immersive audio exercises, and techniques that help you rewrite your personal story. As your expert coach, I am there to support you every step of the way. Now, people have used this program to remove old triggers and create a new empowering mindset, or others have used it to remove resistance to taking certain actions. You can have these same kind of results or something different. If you feel ready to break free from what holds you back, the fears, the worries, the anxieties, those old patterns, whatever they are, and you're ready to embrace a life of confidence and fulfillment, go to xfactorhypnosis.com/transform. It's completely free and you gain a more empowered you. You can use the link in the show notes or just type xfactorhypnosis.com/transform into your favorite browser. Thanks for listening. And remember, stay curious, keep growing, and embrace your transformation.